What's up, YouTube? Hope everybody's having an awesome Saturday. We're getting ready for ban announcements in a couple days, so we'll see how that goes over. In the meantime, we're still messing around with some shadow variants and seeing if anything looks like a good start to the testing phase. If we're expecting a bunch of like Fury hits and things like that, then we want to make sure we're prepared. So this league, we tested out Souls of the Lost, Inti, which we've seen Inti in a previous trophy post with Jun Shadow. Now we're trying it out in straight Rakdos, so basically swapping out like Tarmogoyf for Souls of the Lost, cleaning up the mana base a little bit. Had some flex spots, so I threw in some Bonecrusher giants. Other than that, some of the decisions are kind of looking towards the future bannings. For example, some cursed totems in the sideboard with the expected rise of Yawgmoth and Hardened Scales. Trying out 4 Dauthi Voidwalker in the main since we're not running Gigantha. I know it pains me, but I wanted to see if Dauthi had some legs, because I think it would be really nice to have Dauthi in the deck when going into Yawgmoth, Hardened Scales, any of the unfair matchups like Living End and Rhinos. Having access to Dauthi is really nice. So we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, some Blood Moon effects in the board, some TBRs for the unfair stuff, a couple Terminates, 2 Chalice, 2 EE, the 2 Cursed Totems, a Pithing Needle. A lot of artifact hate in the sideboard. Unfortunately, I think it's just kind of the best options. You could run like Kolaghan's Command. I don't think the most impactful card in the world. You could run some Fatal Pushes, but we'll see what happens. I think the bulk of the lifting is going to be kind of done by like Dauthi, Bowmaster, Rag, Proxa, like all of our good 2-drops and Ragavan. So let's go ahead and show off the matches, see what happens. As you can probably see from the title, we did do pretty well this league, so we'll see. Maybe the title's misleading. Maybe it's April Fools in December. So, game 1, match 1. Start off with a fantastic little one-lander. Like, if I'm in a big event, I throw this back, but strictly for the purposes of testing, I end up keeping it because I'm on the draw. I've got a turn 1 play in Thoughtseize. And if I hit the second land, I've just got like Dauthi, Soul Stomp. So double Street Wraith. Thoughtseize looked like it was going to be Living End off the Wraiths. And then Prismatic Vista into Swamp. I have no idea anymore. Profane Tutor. So literally no clue what this is. Something mono black. Mausoleum Secrets for another Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize themselves ditch Atraxa. They've got Goryo's Vengeance, Emrakul in hand. Decided to throw out the Dauthi so that if they reanimate the Atraxa and it sacks into turn, then I can get an Atraxa. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to like Thoughtseize themselves, take Emrakul and get Emrakul here, because that would just be game over. Atraxa's just game really, really bad. Completely different. I need to pick up a Bone Shards to take out Dauthi, so I'm not going to get an Atraxa. Find a Saga, an Academy Manufactor, Beseiju, Cookbook. So a bunch of good stuff off that Atraxa. But the Atraxa's gone now. They don't have another reanimate target. I just got to be able to fight through these construct tokens that are going to get pretty chunky pretty quick. Thankfully, we've got an unblockable Dauthi. So I ended up holding up this lightning bolt in the hopes that they would like make a construct and then go to activate Cookbook and I could bolt the construct. Unfortunately, opponent sequenced correctly. So it probably would have been better off to just play the Souls of the Lost and throw away the Bonecrusher that last turn. Because even here, if I block with the Shadow, bolt myself, they can activate both of their cookbooks and they end up outgrowing my Shadow. That didn't do me any good. Do get to force a chump block. I was planning on maybe Dolthy sack, get their Profane Tutor to be able to kill off the Construct. And then I remembered after combat that I don't actually have a way of killing that Construct. I only have one Terminate in the main and it's gone. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of Lightning Bolts. And Dolthy attacking is the same thing as Lightning Bolt, so attack in with Shadow. They're going to be able to make this Construct pretty huge, but there's really nothing I can do about it. Like, I could bolt the Manufactor, but if I waste my bolt here, then I can't be sure I've got lethal next turn with double Dolthy attack and bolt. So I want to save it if possible. Opponent looks like they're digging pretty hard for another Bone Shards. Thankfully, they don't find one, so we steal game number 1. Despite our terrible, terrible mulligan decisions. Game number 2, bringing in like Engineered Explosives, bringing in Terminate. Ended up cutting the Bowmasters because it didn't look like they were going to kill anything. And cards like Atraxa don't say draw, they just say put it in your hand. So a little cookbook action. Rip a second EE. So instead of playing out like a Souls here, I'm just going to sit on EE. That way, if my opponent has like an Asmo, I can interact with it. If I play out, if they ditch a card, untap, ditch a card, Asmo, they could kill off my Souls of the Lost. That seems like a bad exchange for me. So instead, we'll just sit on the EE. And if opponent does nothing, we'll crack it. I kind of get the feeling that they're sitting on some sort of interaction, maybe like Fatal Push, Dismember, something like that. So they're waiting for me to make a move, and then they'll be reactive to that. As expected, there's the Fatal Push. Here's our Souls, just sack one of our extra lands, because we're up to 4 lands, so we can Shadow and Bolt and whatever and be okay. There's the Asmo. Asmo gets a cookbook, but they don't have the prerequisite 2 food to be able to shoot anything. So we just get to kill the Asmo, get a big attack in. And Path of Peril. I was really shocked to see Path of Peril in a Haywire Might, Saga Construct, Asmo deck. So that was something. Not something I was ever going to play around, but regardless, here's a Dolthy. Opponent sacks for their Asmo back, and we kind of say, cool. As long as we get to attack in with Dolthy, we don't really care. Unblockable Dolthy. Double Bolt's a pretty good way to get a game over with. Boop. On to match number 2. We are on the play. Love to see it. Turn 1 Rag with a Bobble. Have a really hard time throwing that back. The worst feeling in the world with Ragavan is when you bobble your opponent and you see the removal spell that they're going to get to use on Ragavan. You're like, ah. It looks like mono green Tron. Dismember our Ragavan, but at least that means they don't get like a map down. So I can Souls ditch the Kroxa, grow the Souls a bit, and then like next turn maybe Souls ditch something, get in a good attack. Oh, they're blue Tron. Huh. I ended up Souls ditching the Fable. Maybe it would have been better to keep the Fable and ditch the Dolthy. Also could have just like sacked the Blood Crypt, but Either way, we got him down to 4. Opponent does have a Tormod's Crypt here, so if we can find a fetch land to grow the souls, we can kill with Bolt. We do not find a fetch land, so we just have to Bolt the Karn and hope that they don't have Tron or some big payoff, which means that the opponent has Tron as well as the ability to cast spells. Ballista pings down our entire board. We top deck a Ragavan. Can't cast anything. Scoop it up. Go to the next game. That feels bad. That felt really bad. Done in by a Tormod's Crypt. I know people have said before that, like Souls of the Lost loses to Grave Hate. And I agree with that. So first hand mulligan, no lands, whatever. On to the second hand. I agree with Souls losing to Grave Hate. I don't think it really loses to Grave Hate that much worse than Tarmogoyf. But obviously in the face of Tormod's Crypt, that's pretty bad. At the same time, we did have cards that could have refilled the grave a bit. So it's not like we were completely out of it there. Like I said, if we drew a fetch land, we had lethal. Like a Mishra's Bauble, we had lethal. Down our Bowmaster. Really, I just wanted to get like 2 bodies on board. So if I Inti'd here, I'd have a little protection there. Thoughtseize. Looks like I forgot to pull up the hand on the recording. We'll get that fixed momentarily because I know they have a Tishana here to flash in. Stop the Inti. It's the reason I didn't attack with the Bowmaster is because I knew about the Tishana. There we go. Knew about the Tishana, so I wanted to make them fire off on one of my cards or fire off on just like chumping a token. So some, what is it? Ifara's something. It's like 2 and a blue, bounce a dude, scry 2. Never seen that card before in my life. 1 ring coming down, so no, they got Otawara, Spreading Seas, Unknown. Attacking him with the Dothy just to get the Inti trigger, ditch our extra Inti, try to find a new card, which we do find a second Bowmaster. Really, really good in the face of these 1 rings, 1 ring decks. Ping off some stuff that doesn't really matter. I don't want to ping myself too heavily because of Walking Ballista. Then bobble myself just so I can draw on their turn in case it's a lightning bolt. If I'm expecting a big uptick in the 1 ring decks, look at Bowmaster doing work. If I expect a big uptick in the 1 ring decks, I'll probably try to find some room in the sideboard for Cast Into the Fire. It's not a card I particularly like, but if you have to run it, you have to run it. Thoughtseize on 1. See a really slow hand. Condescend, 1 ring, Expedition map. So they can get like turn 5 Tron or something with map, Academy Ruins back a map. Really, really slow, but they also just have a 1 ring. That being said, we have double Orcish Bowmaster, so we're not completely helpless here. Get down Shadow instead of the Fable so I can get Bowmaster down as well. I'm not expecting them to have a lot as far as Wrath effects go, so I'm not too afraid of like going wide. I've seen Mono Blue Tron have Cyclonic Rift in the past, so that would be a pretty rough one if they hit it. But they do also have to hit another Tron land, which they don't currently have. Here, Bowmaster ping myself because Walking Ballista is a little bit less of a concern without the Tron lands. which they do manage to find. When opponent passes here without doing anything, I'm assuming that Hall of the Storm Giants or like a bounce effect are the only things that they can have. I don't care about a bounce effect because all my stuff's cheap enough to just replay really easily. So Hall of the Storm Giants is the concern. I'm at 7 life, so if I don't kill them here and they get to attack back, I could just be dead to the Hall. So I end up leaving back a single Bowmaster so that I'm presenting lethal. They have to block something. I get in some good damage and then get a follow-up play. If I had Croaksud first, my souls would be 1 bigger, so I could like keep the other Bowmaster back on the defensive, which wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. But I decided to go for Fable instead, and Fable means like attacking first and then Fable post-combat. I also thought since I was dealing 6, maybe just letting my opponent like see if they use the ring and I can ping off Hull and pay for ward. But they don't go for it, so we just have to the token. Opponent can't draw cards. Apparently they have nothing. Probably just like all counter spells in hand. On to match 3. It is it's not too bad to get underneath blue Tron. Like their deck is a lot of remands and condescends and stuff like that. So if you can get down a couple aggressive creatures, usually have an okay time. Round 3 looks like blue-red mURktide on the surface. Blue fetch land, double steam vents, no companion. I don't really want to play out Dothy into like a counter spell or a bolt or something, so I'll just sit on Bonecrusher Giant in case of a dashed Ragavan. I was not playing around Tishana's Tidebinder here. Usually, I think I haven't seen it out of blue-red mURktide much. With these extra lands, it's not the biggest deal in the world. But I do have to get used to like Tidebinder being in the format. If your opponent's playing blue, there's a reasonable chance they're playing Tidebinder. And a main deckable Stifle in like multiples is something to be aware of. So it's going to dash into Ragavan, which is actually good for me because it gets these shadows out of bolt range. So counterspell on the first shadow. Shadow. We've got bolt ourselves to grow a shadow out of heat range if we need it. Speak of the devil. Opponent is on. It does have 4 more cards, so a little scary there, especially if they have another heat. But usually when you see your mURktide opponent struggling with tapping mana, it means mURktide. But we've got Terminate. Okay. Let's talk about this sequence real quick. So I went for Terminate first, and they had a Force of Negation, which means they get to counter the Terminate, deal with the mURktide. If we were going perfect sequencing, I could have gone Kroxa first, so I knew they had a Ragavan. If they ditch a red, or they ditch like something that's not Ragavan, then they couldn't Force a Negation. I would have no threat down, like nothing really relevant going on. I could play out, like if I went for Kroxa first and they ditched something not Ragavan, and then I went for Terminate, obviously the Terminate would resolve. If they ditched Ragavan, then the Force of Negation would have still been there, would have still gotten me. And I wouldn't have a backup to Shadow, so I would just be dead in 2 turns to the mURktide. If I led on the Dothy to terminate the mURktide, this is one of the reasons that I was going to go for the Kroxa line. If I led on the Dothy and then terminated the mURktide, then they would have Ragavan to dash back after I attack with Shadow. So I'd have to decide whether attacking with Shadow was worth it. If I Kroxa first and then Dolphy and they ditch Ragavan, then I'm dead to like Bolt or something. I'm dead to Bolt anyway. Can't really play around it. So it's kind of a, I don't want to say a no-win scenario on this Kroxa or on this entire turn, but it's kind of, it didn't matter how I sequenced. Like I was still losing to something. But a lot of times Magic is about kind of readjusting after new information and seeing what changes. So for example, here, I terminate first. Terminate first. They have the force negation. Now I've got to decide between Dolphy and Shadow. If I play out the Dolphy, they attack with mURktide. They've got the Ragavan as a chump blocker for Shadow. I'm not presenting lethal. If I Kroxa, get the last card out of hand, and they draw dead, they draw like a land this upcoming turn, then they can't attack me with mURktide because they put me down to 2. I hit them for 11, escape Kroxa for the final 3. They're dead. So we opt to go for the Kroxa line because it gives us the out of, if my opponent draws a land, they can't attack. They're dead. And I get to escape Kroxa for free, 3-ball, and then they have to top deck like a lightning bolt the next turn. If I played out the Dolphy instead of the Kroxa, they could untap, attack me, play out the Ragavan, and it puts me on needing to top deck a removal spell. So, yeah, really weird sequence there. Opponent does end up top decking the land, so like I said, they can't attack because they're just dead on the crackback. We get to kind of free roll the Kroxa escape, and now they have to top deck something live. Dolphy makes sure we can exile whatever they top deck. They do trade off the, or do block the Kroxa. I could have played the second Dolphy and attacked with both the Shadow and the Kroxa to guarantee 4 damage gets through. Might have been better, but it put me dead to a dashed Ragavan, and I didn't want to be dead to a dashed Ragavan. So instead, we go to our turn, find a Thoughtseize, which would have grown Shadow up enough to eat the mURktide if we bolted ourselves. But instead, opponent doesn't block. We bolt them for lethal. Lines are weird in Magic. Like, I don't want to play around Force of Negation ever. Mulligan the 7 because it only had a basic swamp. Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to play around Force of Negation, especially out of mURktide in game 1. But probably something to consider. I don't know. I wanted to get Kroxa in the yard because I feel like escaping that Kroxa was a big key to winning the game. I don't have opponent's hand shown, so let's back up to that Thoughtseize. Pretty much just like a bolt and all lands. Yeah, so we take the bolt. We now know they've got Otawara, 2 fetches, and a Spire Bluff Canal. We can fast forward a little bit. Opponents played their other Spire Bluff Canal. We've got a Bowmaster down. They find a 3rd Spire Bluff Canal off of the Expressive iteration. So we still know their hand is like 2 fetches, an Otawara, 2 unknowns. We're just kind of going wide with our tokens. I do land a mURktide here, which is 2-turn clock. Very, very concerning. So naturally, we ditch Kroxa to be able to escape it and immediately just draw into 2 lands. They have a spell snare for the Kroxa. Not looking very good for the home team. Like, our only out would really be top decking a Terminate. So we top deck a Terminate, you know. Magic. Attack in with our dorks. We fire off the Nurturing Peatland. I wasn't even thinking about Tishana's, honestly. I was thinking about maybe drawing into a Thoughtseize or something to get a counterspell out of hand. But then my opponent flashes in the Tidebinder to stop my draw, and now I have a free Terminate to kill the mURktide because I know their last card's Otawara. Top deck Expressive Iteration's pretty good. Flash in the Bowmaster in response to the iteration so it can't get counterspelled, and I can trade off with the Tidebinder if they attack. Still know they have Otawara here, so I don't want to spend a mana going to copy the Goblin token and have my opponent just Otawara the token away. So instead, we attack in with our 2. Hold up the Army token for Dashed Ragavan. Escape our Kroxa. And opponent draws and concedes. So it was actually really, really nice to be able to win that game through the EE on 1 on turn 1 that didn't do anything. On to match number 4. Mulligan because our opening hand was horrible. Let's double check that opening hand before I move on too much. Yeah. So 4 lands, Dolphy, Fable, Bauble. If I was on the play, I would likely keep this because turn 1, you don't expect to see too much. Turn 2, Dolphy. Turn 3, Fable. I can live with that. On the draw, though, just way too slow. So instead, we're going to keep a 1-lander with a Prayer on the draw. Thoughtseize our opponent. We see we're up against a 4-color Omnath deck. They don't currently have the mana for Counterspell, but we currently don't have the mana for any spell. See what I did there? That was clever. Get down Inti. If they want to Solitude this, that's a win for me. If they don't want to Solitude it, then I get to hopefully attack with the Inti, ditch Kroxa, find lands. All according to plan. Now, I don't want to play the Shadow here unless I'm just committed to Bonecrusher on myself. There's a chance that Shadow eats the counter spell. If they go for Solitude, the NT, I can Bonecrusher myself to keep the Shadow alive. Instead, opponent just untaps and Supreme Verdicts. So, I was not expecting Verdict. Was not playing around Verdict. We are definitely getting to a stage in Magic the Gathering that you can kind of just play whatever you want to play, and it's probably okay. It's one of the reasons that whenever I'm emphasizing a new Shadow build, I really put a lot of stress on the idea of not being overly stuck to the ideas of synergy. Just play the good cards, kind of like our opponent is here. Why worry about killing people with Omnath and Solitudes when you can just play Supreme Verdict? So, same thing with Shadow. Don't get too caught up on, oh, this card nombos with Shadow, or Kroxa nombos with Souls of the Lost. Just play the good cards. Also had somebody in one of the Discords asking about the what's the word? I just said it. The clash between Kroxa and Souls of the Lost. And I think that time right there was the only time it came up in the entire league where Souls got shrunk because of Kroxa. But I'd also ditched the Kroxa to the Souls, and then Souls got bounced by Teferi. So Yeah, Kroxa escaping shrunk it, but wasn't doing anything anyway. And if it had been living, then I wouldn't care about the Kroxa. I'd just be hitting them with like a 6/7. Sideboarding against the 4-color deck. Not too much to say. Blood Moon effects coming in, Turok coming in, trimming on like some spot removal, trim on a shadow, maybe 2 shadows. Depends on how good your backup plan is. So I got to check out their hand. They have an Up the Beanstalk, so it's an Up the Beanstalk build of 4-color with Teferi and Omnath and Veil of Summer. So kind of weird to have Up the Beanstalk in this build, especially when you have the 1 ring. I feel like you don't really need Up the Beanstalk. Get down, get our Magus down. So they can 1 ring. They choose not to, so I assume this means a Leyline Binding. It's a counterspell, and then no Leyline Binding, untap the ring. So I don't really know why they're sequencing like this, but I can't do much about it. I'm just going to get a Bowmaster down. They could Veil me here just to cycle the Veil, but end up choosing not to. Ren pings my Bowmaster. Chalice on 1 is fine. My entire game plan now is like escaping Kroxa. So they could have Chaliced on 2, which would have shut down everything that I've got going on. Ditch the Veil to Kroxa. Now opponent like needs to find a Supreme Verdict. If they're bouncing the Ragavan here, I'm assuming that means they've got an answer to the Kroxa, like a Solitude. We'll hit them down to 2, put them dead to their ring trigger unless they find something, and they do not. So they pause for a minute and then scoop. We are going to the next game. There we go. Ugh. 4-color, I think, is like one of the most uninteresting matchups because it's just either you get down under these haymakers or they beat you. I wanted to pause here because you're about to see what I can only describe as the worst hand I could possibly run into with what I've got. So let's break it down. Opponent's got multiple copies of Renin 6 on their 2-lander. So I can't Thoughtseize Renin 6. Multiple prismatic endings. So like Fable, my Shaman token, Ragavan, all pretty rough. They can downtick Fable or downtick Ren on my Ragavan. They've got a 1 ring, so I have to take that. Just absolute like Thoughtseize proof. Bobble them on their turn, top decking a Leyline Binding. So now my Dash Ragavan plan looks worse because they just have an answer to that. We bobble them again and see a second Leyline Binding. So we're going to Dash Ragavan right now to get that second Leyline Binding off the top because I need to start fighting through this stuff somehow. We Thoughtseize, another Leyline Binding, so we know they've got 2 prismatic endings, a second Renin 6. It's still Renin 6 off the top of their library. Maybe this will get them to use a prismatic ending up. We're just going to keep drawing shadows till the cows come home. Which wouldn't be the worst if we weren't up against a Solitude deck. So like if opponent finds a Solitude, I'm in a world of trouble. A little less so against just the 1 ring, because I can at least attack down the Renin 6. Fable lets us go wide here. So all we're trying to do is dodge Solitude, dodge Supreme Verdict, which we do not dodge the Verdict. But we do have Dash Ragavan and 4th Shadow. Gonna ditch. Solitude my Ragavan. Okay. Play out a Shadow, pass back. Now we just have to hope there's a fetch or something and we get to bolt them and they die to their ring trigger. Instead, we get a Bring to Light for Omnath. Okay, so they gain 4 life, go up to 4, or go up to 8. If they fetch, they go down to 7. So now we've got like bolt to put them to 4, ring trigger puts them to 1. So if we can find another point of damage in here somewhere, we've got a chance. Point of damage. We'd love to see it. 1 point. That's all we need. So we can Kroxa just because Kroxa might as well. And then ping them with Bowmaster. Hope they don't have a way to get out of this. If they have like double Solitude, double white card, they can evoke Solitude. And then with the Solitude trigger on the stack, evoke a second Solitude to evoke or to kill the first one. Or with like Endurance or something like that. But opponent doesn't have it for the first time ever. So we get to go to match number 5, playing for the trophy. Turn 1, Thoughtseize, see double Lightning Bolt, Tishana's Tidebinder, Merfolk Trickster, Mutavault, Flame of Anor off the top. Kill off the Trickster. Or Master of the Pearl Trident, so it's just blue-red Merfolk. I thought it was like blue-red Wizards. Kind of is because Flame of Anor, but more just blue-red Merfolk. When it attacks us down, we've got Shadow, which can be double bolted, but they currently only have 1 red source. So Shadow's like a little safe. Trying to save this extra mana as much as I can. And then opponent makes this attack in. They've got a Flame and Orb and an Unknown. I've got 2 options. Option number 1 is Bowmaster in. Well, we'll just go ahead and show. I go with option number 1, which is Bowmaster in. Block everything and try to set up wiping their board, leaving them with the Flame of Anor, and like I have a Shadow, and just hope we can get there. So that involves like I could ping the Orc army or ping the Mutavault, block with like the army token, block a Ragavan on a Master, block Shadow on the Lord, something like that. That would wipe the board. Which is probably what I should have done. So let's see. I was going ping the Lord, Orc army on the Lord, Ragavan Bowmaster on the other Master of the Pearl Trident, and then Shadow on the Mutavault, because I just like wanted to make sure the Mutavault died. But if I had gone ping the Mutavault, Orc army on the Mutavault, Ragavan on Master of the Pearl Trident, Shadow on the other Lord, then if they have nothing, everything dies, and I don't risk my Bowmaster. So that would have been the better line. Yeah. That absolutely would have been the better line. Either way, never punish, because we throw our blockers in the face and they have a flash hex catcher. So the only thing that like blew out this block was a Flash Lord. Or another removal spell, but if they had another bolt, I was dead to that upstairs anyway. So Didn't really matter. Game 2, boarding out all these Dolthies because like not being able to block is a very big cripple in this matchup. Very crippling. Bringing in extra terminates, engineered explosives. Trying to get some good pressure. Opponent ditching a Flame of Anor there, to me, means that they've got, like, nothing going on. We'll get down Souls, ditch a Shadow, because I don't plan on lowering my life total too aggressively anyway. And then when they scoop to the Souls of the Lost, again, I have to assume that, like, their mana's not functioning. They can't cast their spells very well. On to Game 3. And nothing really changing. Sideboarding. I ended up trimming a Ragavan on the draw, but nothing crazy. Thoughtseize, we see double Hexcatcher, Kira Great Glass Spinner, Mutavault Bolt. We'll be kind of aggressive with our life total because if my opponent's just going for Hexcatchers and like attacking in, then Shadow gets to outgrow Bolt. That's great for me. I could force chump blocks really, really quickly. Was hoping for a fetch land, but we'll settle for getting some shadows down. Attack in with Rag. They choose not to block, which is great for me because Fable not getting Hexcatchered is really nice. Now I can ditch away this extra Kroxa. Attack in with some members of the squad. They end up picking up a third copy of Hexcatcher, but I've got removal spells for the first two, so they decide to just scoop it up, and that's how you trophy with Rakdos Shadow. Weird league. Like, weird matches, some weird lines in there. Really cool regardless, because I do think Souls of the Lost look decent. I wouldn't say great, but I would say decent. I've seen some people bringing up some tech ideas of like Souls of the Lost with, what's his name? Bloodghast. So you can ditch it to Souls. You could sack it to Souls, get it back pretty easily. Maybe that's something worth looking into if the meta slows down a lot. I think as it currently is, I'm not too interested in Bloodghast. Because if your opponent just plays like a 2-3, dang. Well, nothing to do now. Plus Bloodghast, I think, yeah, it only triggers when your opponent's at 10 or less life. If it triggered when you were at 10 or less life, I'd be like all on board with the Bloodghast tech. But let's go back to the list. Probable changes. I think Bauble should probably just be dropped for Street Wraith. Makes you a little bit worse against Burn, but it makes the one-landers better. You don't care about Delirium in this build with no Unholy Heats. It does trigger Inti, which I don't think is like an end-all be-all reason to play Street Wraith, but I do just think it makes like the one-landers better. You can always ditch Street Wraith later to Fable or something. As far as permanents go, it doesn't change the permanent count for Souls of the Lost. You can ditch Street Wraith a little bit easier, though, if you just want to get down to Souls. In the sideboard, if we're expecting a bunch of these scam players to convert to like Rakdos mid-range, then it might not be a bad idea to have access to like Kolaghan's Command. You could run Shieldred if you really wanted some like Haymaker in a matchup like that, or something against the One Ring. I did mention Cast into the Fire. I'd like to find room for a copy or two of that. Again, a lot of this is speculation, not really sure how the meta is going to progress after the ban announcement. If Fury gets hit, if something else like Bowmasters or the One Ring gets hit, then it shifts up what we're doing pretty significantly. So I don't really want to speculate too much and start going down the rabbit hole of like, oh, this is what my deck is going to look like, because I don't know. really all I'm trying to do right now is say, hey, is Inti worth checking out more? Is Souls of the Lost worth checking out more? And I'd say they both performed okay. Like Inti, I've seen do a little bit better in previous Jund leagues. Souls of the Lost was okay. It was really good, like, beater when your opponent couldn't get rid of it immediately. We saw against like Merfolk, reasonable body. But it does get hit by Grave Hate harder than Tarmogoyf. Not by a ton, but there is like a set of Grave Hate cards that hit souls worse than Goyf, like Leyline of the Void, Tormod's Crypt, those one-sided Wrath or Grave Wrath effects. So keep that in mind. If you can find ways to mitigate the downside of Souls of the Lost, I do think it's a reasonably sized card. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought, what your opinions of Rakdos are, what you would change. As always, love hearing feedback. That helps me make adjustments for future leagues because I know ideas that I didn't previously have access to. Otherwise, link down below to the Twitch in case you want to come catch a live stream. Link to the Twitter so you know when those live streams are happening. Link to the Discord if you want to come talk shadow, non-shadow, anything like that. And deck list. So let me know what you think. I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the weekend. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Looking forward to the bands. Adios for now.